Daniel, I think I need a new bag. Okay, while we're waiting for this, let's get open to Matthew chapter 7. All right, there we go. So we're going to be moving into chapter 7 tonight, but as I said, I want to look at the very last question on the previous section. So it's going to be looking at the last few verses of chapter 6 here. So we talked about our worries and our cares and all of the things that we fret about and are anxious about, and comparing their worries to our worries in terms of just really how much more serious the things that Jesus presents here are than the things that we often worry about. So I want to look down starting at, let's look at verse 31. Starting in chapter 6, verse 31. It says, "Therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." So we could say a lot of things about this, but I want to zero in on question number 5, so that last one on the previous sheet, which just says, instead of focusing all of our attention on our anxieties or the things that we're worrying about, what does Jesus give as the positive thing that we should pursue? What? God and his service, yeah. So there's a couple ways that we can look at this, right? So verse 31 seems to be where Jesus is really drawing the conclusion with everything that he's talked about in that paragraph. So therefore you might have, for this reason, do not be anxious about all these things that we've just talked about, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear, because the Gentiles, the nations are looking after all these things, and God knows that you need them. So if Jesus is saying, draw your attention away and don't be worrying and thinking about all of this, but instead be thinking about the fact that God knows that you need this, what is he asking us to then focus on? Not our worries, but on what? God knows you need this, so... What was that, Margaret? Yeah, God's righteousness, his faithfulness, the fact that he knows that you need it, so he's going to give it to you. So instead of spending all of our energy worrying and focusing on our anxieties, Jesus gives the positive direction of focus on God's faithfulness. He knows that you need this. And look at all of these illustrations that I've given. He is going to give you what you need. So we're looking at, we need to replace our fear with God's goodness and his trustworthiness, his faithfulness. Don't worry, because your heavenly Father knows that you need these things. And that is sort of thought of it in terms of it's like fighting the fear. Or maybe even like fighting fire with fire kind of thing. But it is replacing it with something, because we know that saying of don't think of the pink elephant or whatever it is. Don't worry about this stuff, right? Don't be anxious, don't worry. And then if you're like me, what are you going to do? That's all I'm thinking about.
Yeah, then you worry about being worried.
Exactly. And then I think about how worried I am, and oh man, I'm going to get an ulcer, and all of this kind of stuff. And true story, by the way, right? But Jesus says instead where you need to focus your attention is on God's faithfulness. So that's really, as we said, the problem of not really truly believing all of this boils down to the simple fact that we don't trust God enough. And so meditating on God's trustworthiness is one of the things that Jesus gives as really the antidote to this worry that we're talking about. Jim?
Yeah, people that worry
Yeah.
It's like the saying is, like a rocket chair, it gives you something to do, but it gets you nowhere.
Yeah, it doesn't do any good, that's for sure. And obviously, we're given some of those feelings or instincts and things for self-preservation and things, but we're talking about when it gets completely off the rails and it's consuming, right? And so another way to say this, Jesus makes it very succinct and says in verse 33, but seek first the kingdom of God, or you might have his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things that we're talking about will be given to you. So Jesus says focus on God's kingdom, God's righteousness. What does that mean? Let's take the first one. What would it mean to focus on his kingdom? And keep it in the context of worry and anxiety. What does it mean to focus on God's kingdom instead of worrying?
I would
Zach?
say, with the anxieties and everything that's in here, we have to focus on this as temporary, and the kingdom is the forever goal. And even like growing the kingdom here, the kingdom's going to surround us with comfort here for the time being, until we reach the eternal kingdom. If any of that just made sense.
I think so. So you're talking about the idea that the kingdom is more,
Yeah,
right?
that this is just these little anxieties and these little things that go on in the world are temporary.
Yeah.
And focusing on his kingdom is focusing on the eternal goal, but also something that's bigger and, not just temporary.
We adjust our perspective, as we've talked about, right? If we get really focused on ourselves, self-obsessed sometimes with this, and Jesus says you need to look at the bigger picture as part of this. So that's good. Somebody else had, yes.
The essence of the kingdom is God's rule.
Yeah.
And the whole sermon is on submitting to God's rule. I think we go too far if we take the end of chapter 6 to condemn all worry and
Right.
anxiety. Jesus was anxious when he went into the garden. We're not going to do better than Jesus. What he did, though, was his worry drove him to God
Mm-hmm.
rather than being a distraction from God. Paul had fears and doubts, anxieties at various times. The issue is not, are you anxious? It's not all stress is wrong, but are you letting it distract you from God
Yeah.
or drive you to God?
Absolutely. I think in terms of something that Jesus says earlier in the chapter, we could even restate that as talking about verse 24. All of these things that we worry about and we try to focus on and we put our attention toward, it's going to anchor your heart somewhere. So are your worries and your obsessions and anxieties, are those dragging you away from God and placing your heart and your treasures somewhere else? Because that's what you're worried and focused on, right? So it's about this balance and perspective. And with what was just said too about God's rule, let's look at chapter 6 and verse 10. In the prayer that Jesus gives as sort of this example, this model here, Jesus begins the prayer, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is, again, about perspective. Where are we focusing our attention? And it was already said, submission. So we need to be thinking about our submission to God and the fact that his kingdom is over all things. We need to be looking for his glory. I think another word that works is a surrender. Especially, I think that helps with the anxieties and the worry. I need all these things and I can worry and be consumed with all of this anxiety, but I am going to surrender my cause to the King. And that's what I'm going to focus on. Because I know who he is and I know what he is going to do. And so surrender, submission, I think those are a lot of good things. What does it mean to seek his righteousness? So we're seeking to surrender, to submit ourselves under God in his kingship, but what does it mean to pursue his righteousness?
I was taking it to align ourselves with God's righteousness and his pattern, what he tells us to do.
Yeah, it's trying to live his way, right? Brace, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I mean, again, in line with the theme of the entire sermon, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And so we've got to have the righteousness that comes from God. So we're striving to live according to his truth. So surrendering to him means trusting in his rule, and it means a willingness to submit to his rule and to walk with him.
Your way is better than mine, and so I'm going to do it. And as Brace was talking about that, we need to say again, as we've said before, his righteousness, is that just about certain behaviors? Doing certain things and not doing other things? What does the sermon reveal? Is it just about behavior? Absolutely not. Our attitudes and we talked about heart postures or heart conditions, that is wrapped up in God's righteousness. Because often we can think, God's righteousness, so I need to follow the rules and check the boxes that go through this sermon, right? But he is talking about a complete transformation of the way that we think and feel and believe about things at the heart level, the soul level. And so we need to make sure that when we're seeking his kingdom and his righteousness, we're aligning ourselves under his rule, obviously, but we're also seeking to be like him in word and thought and deed. Right? Joy.
One of the things that this brought up to me was a couple of things. Believing in who God is, what he knows, and whether I understand it or not, he is in charge and he is on my side. He wants the best for me. So rather than me thinking, but I don't understand this, I don't understand this, I don't get this, why is this? I can't. That's his. And the other thing that brought to my mind was like in 12-step programs, they talk about the word acceptance. And that's probably the biggest bell that rings for me, is accepting that he is in charge, not me.
Yeah.
Accepting who he is, what he's about, and that he's not a boogeyman either.
Yeah. I mean, where does the first beatitude begin? Blessed are the poor in spirit. That's accepting where I am in relation to God, right? Yeah, accepting who he is. Absolutely. Okay. Ashley, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that the seek part is not seeing, like, I can see Salem and I can appreciate her, personality. This is a pursuit. Like,
Yeah.
I'm seeking it out. And, there's the book that Greg and I wrote, diligently seeking God. And, I think that phrase is so important because you are pursuing him to get to know him, to know who he is and, what he's done and everything. So.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was just kind of curious. And so depending on the context, it can be to desire something, searching for it, looking for it. And as we talked about last time, it's a present and active thing. Like this is ongoing, that we need to do this. Absolutely. Not just seeing, but really desiring and pursuing. Yeah, Brace.
But the beauty is the more that we do what Ashley's talking about, the closer we're drawn to him, and the easier we find some of these tasks, like trusting in him and not worrying about certain things. It doesn't mean everything's going to be easy. It doesn't mean there aren't going to be things that are thrown at us that are difficult.
Yeah.
But it becomes easier when we have some of those things solidly and planted and embedded in our heart and mind. It becomes easier to face some of those trials and struggles.
Yeah, it just gets better and better.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so, yeah, Chip.
I can get why we're not supposed to worry about like these earthly blessings that we have here, because even the non-believers haven't received those blessings, but we've received a better gift than they have, Christ. So we need to keep our minds on him and keep our fellowship with him.
Yeah, we do that, and Jesus is promising everything else is going to fall into place if you keep your focus right. Okay, so Ashley is last, and then we'll move to the next sheet.
A phrase that's really good to use as kind of like training wheels to worst that can happen. And I mean, the worst that can happen is I'm gonna die and go to heaven. So is that the worst that can happen? And so just in different situations, you know, even lacking the necessities, like what's the worst that can happen? I'm gonna die and go to heaven. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah, obviously, a little bit different situation, but Jesus says, don't fear those who can kill the body, because that's all they can do, right? And that's that same kind of, anchoring ourselves in who God is. Okay, so let's move into chapter 7. So this is going to be this new sheet that says righteousness in relationships. So that's how I've tried to sort of tie this together here. And tonight we're just going to focus on verses 1 through 6. So can I get a volunteer? Let's just read 1 through 6. A volunteer to read chapter 7, 1 through 6 for us. Zach.
Judge not that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use it will be measured to you. Why do you seek the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there's a log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you.
Some interesting things here, right? So, we've been talking about anxiety and worry and where is your heart, so those focus and priorities sort of things. And then Jesus opens with this statement of, don't judge so that you won't be judged. Is that related in any way, or are we just totally taking a 90-degree turn somewhere else? Is there a connection that you can see?
Well, the whole sermon is in opposition to hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Religion that's only outward, righteousness like the Pharisees instead of true righteousness. And one way it connects is he's talking about hypocritical judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. He uses that exact word in verse 5, talking about these sort of attitudes that he's describing. He says, you hypocrite, and that's something that's carried through. So we're avoiding hypocrisy is one of the goals of this. Somebody else, what do you think is maybe a connection, if there is one, between this and what we've been talking about previously? Grace.
We're not practicing the righteousness of God and trusting in the character of God and His faithfulness when we are critically judgmental of other people. And I'm not talking about discerning their actions and trying to point out where God wants them to do differently. I'm talking about the kind of critical judgment that can lead to almost condemnatory speech, that we act like we're pronouncing judgment. And the other thing is the kind of thing Alan was talking about, which is a hypocritical judgment that looks at others very critically but doesn't bother to examine itself.
Yeah, that's what a lot of this section is focused on. It's not, so we want to get hung up a lot of times, I think, on the word judge, but what we're really talking about here is judgmentalism. So if we'll do this in a second and put it in the context of the sermon. So this is not condemning, making any kind of judgments whatsoever. We're talking about judgmentalism or being unmerciful in our judgments, that hypocrisy, the lack of self-awareness and self-examination. Liz.
I think another thing is that Jesus is talking about not focusing on self. So treasures in heaven, don't focus on what's on the world. Worry, don't focus on what's in the world, what's going on in your brain. And then judgment, don't focus on what others are doing in the world. Focus on God.
Yeah, that's similar to what I had written down here, at least. So we're talking about, obviously, the kingdom of heaven, God's rule. His righteousness is kind of overarching things. And Jesus leaves us in verse 34 of chapter 6, so therefore don't worry about tomorrow. And then I think in some ways he's, in these next verses in chapter 7, saying, and don't worry about other people either. You need to focus on yourself, for one thing. And we're not talking about self-obsession, right? But the examination. So don't worry about things that you can't control with worrying about tomorrow. Don't worry about things that you can't control with being condemning and hypocritical and judgmental about other people either. So in order to follow both of those, we've already used the word. What is it that Jesus is calling us to? If we're not supposed to worry about things that we can't control outside, day-to-day life, if we're not supposed to worry about what other people are doing, then what should we be doing? Looking at who? And we use the word self-examination, right? Don't worry about tomorrow, and really don't worry about other people. Aaron.
This just came to mind, so this might be half-baked and may not make any sense.
We'll let you know.
Okay. When it talks about, the transition from don't worry about your life to judging others, it made me think about when our kids were growing up, and, they're always like, well, but she gets to do that. And, it causes them stress and worry and anger and excitement. And what do we tell them? Don't worry about what they get to do. This is what you get to do. And I kind of see a connection to that in, going from don't be anxious about your life, don't stress about this stuff, and also don't judge other people, what they do, what they have, and everything's going on in their life, because that's just going to continue to add to the problem.
Yeah. We had a situation like that on the way over here. And it was, I won't say who it was, but somebody did not want to listen to anything that they were being told, and was shocked when, they've been given direction for an hour and a half, and then, hey, we have to leave, and you haven't done any of it. And so we get in the car, and they were making sure to tell everybody that Mama just needs to calm down. And that went for a couple seconds, and it was like, I think I know something that Jesus said about this, Shepherd. And it was kind of why don't you look at what you did first? It got a little quiet after that. But yeah, Jim.
Yeah, a lot of people misunderstand the judgment. Really, the Bible commands us to judge. Judging is a duty, but it's dangerous. We have to be careful about judging. But I talk to people over the years, they always say, you're judging, you're judging. I said, no, my friend, you're mistaken about that. I leave that up to God. Just what he said about it. If you don't like it, take it up to him in the day of judgment. John 7:24 says, judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment. So, yes, we're to judge, but we better be cautious and careful and be right about it. Give them God's judgment.
So you're bringing up the idea of righteous judgment there, right? And that gets into this number one here of, do these verses mean that we're not supposed to judge anyone at all?
Of course not.
Why would you say of course not?
Just like the not worrying about what we eat or drink or wear does not unconcern. He says, if you do the right thing, that'll be added to you. Doing what we ought to do is the way to have what we need physically also.
Yeah.
And doing what we ought to do regarding self-assessment is the best way we can help the others be what they ought to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
First, remove the plank from your own life, and then you'll see clearly to help the other person.
Yeah, because we need to be focusing on trying to help others, right? And so we look at that, for one thing, yeah. Again, we want to get hung up, I think, on the word judge sometimes, but as we've said, when you look at all this, we're talking about really judgmentalism, as we would say it. Hypocrisy, those kinds of things. But just from that verse that Alan brought up, we are supposed to be making a judgment sometimes, but what's the first step before we start looking at other people and assessing things?
Evaluate ourselves.
Gotta look at myself first, right? Joy.
Here's what I have experienced is that the reply to that is, there is no log in my eye. I've looked and I'm fine. I've looked and I'm perfect. It's them. So it's not just their self-assessment is off.
Yeah. I think the denial of a log would point that there's a log there. I don't know necessarily how I would say that in the moment, but if I was to say that to somebody, I think you should probably tell me, maybe go check again. If you don't think if there's nothing in your eye, you don't think that, maybe you should look again, right? Because even just with the Beatitudes, recognizing our spiritual state, one of the things that we've been talking about over and over and over again with this sermon is that it is supposed to produce humility at some of the deepest levels of who we are. If we're accepting God's rule and His righteousness, and we're looking at ourselves in the context of this, it should produce humility. And if it doesn't, then we're not embracing what Christ is talking about. It's just simple as that. Ashley.
And this made me think of in John 8, when the adulterous woman was brought to Jesus, and I mean, they were right in saying, you know, she's adulterous and everything, but Jesus says, hey, you know, let you who is without sin throw the first stone, and they all dropped their stones and left. And so I think it's telling us again, even with, you know, righteous judgment, you need to be self-critical and make sure that you're self-examining before you go afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. As somebody said, it's dangerous. Just a couple more points to show. So I want to talk about just a couple more things that show this is not talking about not making any kind of assessments, right? So we've already had pointed out to us of make your eye clear so that you can see clearly to help other people. Also, if you look at verse 6, do not give to dogs what is holy. Don't throw your pearls before pigs. How are you supposed to determine a pig and a dog if you're not making some kind of judgment call there? Also, verses 15 through 20. Beware of false prophets. You know, examine, verse 20, thus you'll recognize them by their fruits. Examining fruits and things. That's a judgment. So putting it into the context here of what Jesus is talking about, he's not saying don't make any kind of judgment calls. He's warning us about that hypocrisy and that self-importance and that heart of being unmerciful. And what we really, I think, need to anchor on to here with what we've been talking about so far, verse 2, I think, should be really striking and sobering for all of us. Where Jesus says, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. If I sit and think about that God is going to return on me the same way that I've been judging and relating to other people, oh, wow. That causes me some pause before I want to say something to anybody else. It really does. And to be frank, I worry about a lot of Christians when it comes to this verse, just from the things that I've seen in my life. I worry about a lot of people. If the way that we are treating other people is essentially how God's going to put it back on us, according to this verse, that is a scary thing. And we need to take that very seriously. So all of this is, prefaced by that humble self-examination, right? Did somebody over here have their hand up? Yeah, Jim.
A lot of people are right about that. You can't judge anything. You just gotta get through life,
Yeah, that's true.
But make sure you always get with God's judgment, and you can't be wrong about it.
Yeah, we got to make it about what he says and not what I say. That's for sure. And so we moved then into verse 2 here. So I said with this question, try to put verse 2 in your own words. Put verse 2 in your own words of what is Jesus saying to you. By that I don't mean, what do these verses say to you in sort of that way that we think about it? What is Jesus saying? And make sure that the way that you state it is about yourself. Put verse 2 into your own words. Chip.
I could see someone that is judging others and it's like, it's not meant to be that. It's meant to be like God will judge you, but I can see how people like that are gossiping and things like that, like they think that they're such great people and stuff like that in their minds, but other people are doing the same thing to them at the same time. It's not getting anyone anywhere, you know?
Yeah, I think about that every so often I gotta be really careful when I disagree with somebody, because there's absolutely somebody out there that disagrees with me, even though I think I'm 100% right. That should cause us to pause. You know, and I think that's a good thing to bring up there, Chip. Somebody else, how do you put verse 2 into your own words? Well, there you go, Margaret. Yeah. Honestly, I hadn't even thought of summarizing that way, but that not accidentally works out perfectly. Brace, what were you going to say?
Unmerciless and critical and condemnatory is my judgment of other people. That's the kind of judgment I can expect God to use on me.
Yeah, and that's...
It causes me pause.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also should point, I mean, we talked about being a peacemaker Sunday night. Probably also means that I got some amends to make. Like, seriously considering that. Anybody else want to take their stat? Yeah, Ashley.
So you wanted us to put it back on us. So Ashley, your standard of judging people will be used to your benefit or your detriment?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I'm merciful, right, the merciful will receive mercy, Jesus said. And when we looked at that, we said, what's the flip side? The unmerciful will not receive mercy. And that is something that Jesus talks about multiple times in different ways. That the way that we relate to other people and how we see ourselves in comparison to them, if I think, as Chip was talking about, when I'm judging someone, if I'm judgmental and critical and unmerciful, that is implying I'm better than you. And that doesn't have any room in the kingdom of heaven. Joy.
My double standards is not God's standard.
Yeah, that's a good one too. My double standards are not God's standard. I'm pretty good at justifying things, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Did you want to go? Yeah.
Joy mentioned earlier the person who claims that, well, I've already removed the log from my eye. But if we think that having done that gives us a right to be judgmental,
Yeah.
we're not seeing clearly. Jesus' teaching is about seeing clearly.
Yeah.
When we see clearly, because of our sin that we've had to recognize and deal with, we have a connection with the person we're talking to. We're not in their face shaking our finger. We're at their side with our arm around.
Yeah.
We're not coming off as though we know God's judgment against them and we're happy about it. We're wanting to give them the same help that we were given.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when we look at this in the context just of the whole sermon, so even just the paragraphs that come before this, I am someone who is wholly dependent on God. I don't have control over anything. I can't even control getting what I need. And I need to depend on God for that. Okay, well, yeah, so do other people, right? I need to be humble about these things. What Jesus is pointing us to is, as was said, not to look at yourself and make sure that there's nothing in your eyes so that you can go out and be judgmental. The self-examination is to produce humility and mercy when we see ourselves really in the right light. And that's what we see throughout this sermon. If I'm thinking about who I am in relation to my Father in heaven and toward the other people in His kingdom, that should be humbling. It should cause a heart of mercy and graciousness, and it should affect the way that I treat people. Brace.
If we find joy in telling other people about their faults, then we're not the person to do it.
Yeah.
We don't do it because we enjoy it. We do it because we're called to do it as God's servants who long for others to walk righteously with Him too, so that we can all be together in heaven. And that's the purpose for which we call to their attention what God says about their actions.
Yeah.
It's to try to make them right with God.
Absolutely. It's always interesting to me. I dread conversations sometimes of meeting a new person, and it's the, oh, what do you do? Oh, what do you do? And ultimately, when it's my turn, then people don't want to talk to you anymore, is usually the case. And I find, sitting down with a person, just even if they know that you're a professing follower of Jesus, they think automatically, you're just so much of a better person than I am. And really what I found to be extremely helpful is when they're telling me about themselves, because that's usually, I want to get to know you. What's kind of your story? There is always room for opportunity to connect of, yeah, I was there too. Yeah, I had that same kind of experience. Yeah, you think that's bad? Actually, I did worse. And that really, I think, opens, because so many people have this conception of God's people are judgmental and hypocritical and things like that. And that is our fault. That's not God's fault. That's our fault. And so one of the ways, I think, to remedy that is just to connect with people and say, yeah, I was in that same exact place, and some days I decide to jump back in there. The difference is the king that I'm now under. And that can give people hope, I think. That was just one of my little soapboxes there. So that's free. The next ones will not be free. Okay. Let's look at number 3 here. So we were talking about this idea of the log and everything. Verses 3 through 5. Why do you see the speck that's in your brother's eye but don't notice the log in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly that take the speck out of your brother's eye. What is Jesus actually illustrating here? What is Jesus using that to illustrate?
You got problems too.
You got problems too. Yeah, that's one way to put it for sure. Brace.
It's really easy for us to be critical of little faults in other people and to miss really big ones in our own lives.
Yeah.
I've had conversations recently about how easy it is to see in your children bad behavior. And I mean, it's just so obvious. It slaps you in the face.
Yeah.
How can they not get this? And then I told her, we were talking about it, I said, God looks at us the same way. I mean, we're doing it to the best of our ability. God does it perfectly. And yet we still do the same thing. We try to do it our own way. And, we thumb our nose at him. And I mean, it's easy to see it in our kids who don't really know better yet, and to miss it in ourselves who should. So Jesus is trying to make that clear to us.
What I've learned probably in the last year and a half is that my son seems to be a reincarnation of me. And I've been told by my mother especially that I'm getting some payback for things. And it used to make me so frustrated when he would do something, or just things that he was afraid of, and then I would just have this flashback or something of, oh, I did the same thing. Or we'll have situations where he'll do something or say something, and Salem will say, why did he do that? That makes no sense. And I'll say, I can tell you exactly why he did that. Because I did the same thing. I actually did the same thing earlier today. Thank you. So, I found parenting to be really humbling, for one thing, just because of that. Brace, what you were talking about, I've heard the concept, I don't remember initially where I heard it, but the idea of pride blindness. That pride will blind us to the reality of who we are. And there's warnings, really promises throughout Scripture of if we allow pride to blind us that way, if we hold on to it, then that is going to distance us from God. Not that he goes anywhere, but that in that blindness we stray away from him. right? Somebody else, what do you think Jesus is illustrating here in verses 3 through 5? Joy.
Actually, I think I can't stand not to say this, and it has to do with Galatians 6:1.
Okay.
Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, that's a possibility, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. I have that so underlined because
Yeah.
that's not what I have seen. And then, next part is, keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted.
Yeah, Jude, I think, states it in the terms of, restoring such one, but being careful of even the garment that's stained by the flesh.
The way you do it.
Yeah, and the way you do it, absolutely. Jim?
Yeah, and this idea of judges people. See, God reproves, rebukes, and exhorts people. 2 Timothy 2, Timothy was commanded to do the same thing. How can we do any less? We're to do that with love, all right, but clear and plain as God would have us to, so people will know what to do to be saved. Be called, come from God. Preaching, teaching, you've got to balance that.
Yeah, we got to make love the motivation, absolutely. 1 Timothy, love from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith, right? That is a lot of what we're talking about. So Jesus is talking about this situation where there's a lack of self-examination, for one thing. There's pride blindness. There's this hypocrisy of unmerciful judgment. And it's basically, I see Aaron. You're sitting right here, so you're easy to pick on. I see Aaron doing something, and I say, man, what a moron. Look at what Aaron's doing, and I make sure to go up to him and tell him, and he's like, dude, who are you to be talking to me about any of this? But I don't see it, of course, because I got to make sure that Aaron hears what he needs to hear. And Jesus is saying, in that situation, when I see Aaron doing something, for one thing, I need to say, am I guilty of that myself? I need to look at myself there. And then how is my relationship with God right now? If I'm talking the talk, but I'm not walking the walk, if I'm just pretending and I'm not seeking his kingdom and his righteousness, do I really honestly have any business approaching Aaron? I don't. Because that hypocrisy, God says he's going to count that against me when I'm judged. So that's one thing that we need to be careful about. So we are going to pick up with number 4 on Sunday, and we'll finish this sheet on Sunday, and then on Sunday I'll have the next one for you. So that's going to be verses 6 through 12, so be prepared for that. Does anybody have any last comments or questions before we are done? Okay, thank you, everyone.